Thanks for tuning in to another knitting tutorial video. This is your host, Wendy Ann, and it's the beginning of winter and pretty cold here in Jersey City, New Jersey, but I'm ready because I have on a Honeycomb Brioche hat and scarf set. Today's tutorial will cover how to perform the Honeycomb Brioche stitch, and you can even check out my pattern for making this unique scarf. Today I'd like to show you the Honeycomb Brioche stitch. It's a beautiful stitch for showing off variegated yarn, and you might want to actually try and do this pattern. This is one of my original designs. It's a beautiful scarf. How we do the Honeycomb Brioche stitch is fairly straightforward. It's an alternate of 2 different rows with a 4-row repeat. And the difference between rows 1 and 2 and rows 3 and 4 isn't the stitches themselves, it's the order in which you do them. So I have here an even number of stitches that have been cast on, and that's how you do the Honeycomb Brioche. You cast on an even number of stitches. You would do 1 row at least of knit for your foundation row. The first and the last stitch are also knit. They're your edge stitches. So row 1, we begin by knit 1 for our edge stitch. The second stitch on row 1 is not knit in the loop on the needle, but rather we knit underneath it. We knit below. Third stitch is a regular knit stitch. Then we knit below. And you'll see with the regular knit stitch, you're pulling the yarn through one other strand. When you do the knit below, you're pulling the yarn through so that there's 2 strands of yarn, and they're actually twisted one over the other. So we knit 1 and we knit below. Knit 1, knit below. We end the row with 2 knit 1s. So that's row 1, really straightforward. Row 2, we have to work those stitches that were knit below. So we start off with a knit 1 for our edge stitch. The second to last stitch on row 1 was just a regular knit stitch, so on row 2 it's a regular knit stitch. Now things get a little more interesting. Here is the back side of the row where you knit below. See how we have those 2 pieces of yarn? One of them is fairly loose. The other one is tightly wrapped around the loop on the needle. It's the loose stitch that we want to pick up and knit that together with the loop that is on the needle. Just like that. Here's a regular stitch, so we do a knit 1. And here we have those 2 pieces of yarn again. So we take the loose one and the loop on the needle, and we're going to knit them both. Regular knit, knit both. Regular knit, knit both. Regular knit and knit both. The variegated yarn is also great for learning how to do the Honeycomb Brioche. We end with our knit stitch because it allows you to see your work fairly clearly, so you know which stitch to do what with, or which piece of yarn. Now row 3 is a repeat of row 1, but we're offsetting when we begin. So on row 1 we had our edge stitch, and the very next stitch we knit below. In row 3 we're going to knit that stitch, and then on the following stitch we'll knit below. And really, when you do this pattern, if you simply observe your knitting, you won't need to remember, am I on a row 1 or am I on a row 3, or is it a 2 or 4? Because the stitches themselves will tell you what to do. See how we have 2 pieces of yarn? Here we have the loop that's on the needle, and the loop that wraps around it, and then an extra. When we see these two on an odd row, we just simply knit it. When we see that on an odd row, row 3, that there's the loop on the needle with only one piece of yarn, we want to knit below. So where there's 2, you do a regular knit stitch, and where there's only 1, you knit below. So we knit and we knit below. The other thing that's helpful for me is the way I hold the work. I'm holding the needle, and then I also hold the work, and I pull the work down a little bit as I go so that I can really take a look at these stitches. So here's 2 on the bottom, these 2 pieces of yarn. So I'm just going to do a regular knit stitch. Here, there's only 1 piece of yarn, so I will knit below. And I end with my edge stitch, which is always a knit stitch. So that's row 3, the offset of row 1. Row 4 is the offset of row 2, and again, we use our existing work to tell us what we do with any particular stitch. We know our edge stitches are always knit. Let's take a look at this second stitch here. We have 2 pieces of yarn wrapping around this loop. One is loose, the other is tight. So I'm going to take that loose piece of yarn and my loop on the needle, and I'll work the 2 of them and pull them both off. This one is a regular knit. Here I've got my 2 and a regular knit. And here's my 2 again, and a regular knit, and my 2 again, and a regular knit, and the 2 again, a regular knit, and with my edge stitch, which is a knit stitch. And this will end up being the back side of the work. This will be the front side, and the more rows you do, the more this beautiful stitch comes out. Thanks for watching.